Welcome to the Drachnik and Friends official podcast, where we peel back the curtain on puzzle games and the people who make them. I'm Syrenne from Drachnik and Friends, and I'm joined as always by Alan Hazelden, the head Drachnik at Drachnik and Friends.
Hey there.
Today, we're joined by Michael Brough, who you may know from his work on a large amount of games, and in fact, a whole genre considered to be bro-likes. How are you doing today?
I'm good.
So, can you give yourself an introduction for people who do not know who you are or what a bro-like is?
I'm a Kiwi, and I kind of got into the indie game scene in the early 2000s when I moved to the UK and connected up with the UK indie scene there. And I made several puzzle games, most notably Corrypt, and a lot of roguelikes and games that are around and about roguelikes. 868 Hack, of which I'm working on a sequel at the moment, 868 Back, Imbroglio, Cinco Pass, and like a few other little ones. And like just a whole bunch of weird stuff too. Like you can't really sum it up. I've done stuff.
What got you into wanting to design games in the first place?
In the first place, goodness. As long as I can remember, it was a thing that I wanted to do. Like, as a child, I remember, what do you want to do when you grow up? Oh, I want to make computer games. No, you can't do that. That's not a real job. Think of something else. Like,
well, you showed them.
I did. Well, maybe they would still think that if they look at my present financial situation and so on. But that was a thing, and like I mentioned that I got into it for serious when I moved to the UK, and that was when I actually met in person other people who did that, because in Aotearoa, New Zealand at the time, it was not a thing, and so like the people around me were saying that's not a thing. I was like, oh, obviously it is a thing because these things get made, so it must happen somewhere. And like the fact that I was in the UK, I didn't work for a company there or anything, but just the mere fact of meeting people like Alan and Stephen Laval and Terry Kavanagh is what like really convinced me that this was a thing that I could do.
Yeah, because we had Stephen on the podcast. That episode went out, I think, a month ago at the time this episode is coming out. And yeah, we talked a little about the Cambridge Jam scene, which was deeply impactful on me too. And yeah, like I would have met you there, and you would have either been working on or just released your game Vertex Dispenser. Did you start that project before making those connections with the UK game dev scene, or after?
Yeah, I started that actually in New Zealand when I was studying maths there, and then. Yeah, so I was making games before that, but I wasn't. I'd internalized the belief that that was just a hobby and not something I could really do as my main thing. So it's somewhere in that transition that I went back to it and said, oh, I could actually finish this as kind of a big game, which wasn't necessarily a good idea, but that's what I did, and then. But more importantly, got into the game jams and learned the ethos of how you actually finish something, how you finish something quickly, and develop your skills of the entire process by the practice of jamming, and that really informed all of my work going on from there.
So, going from early jams and early prototypes. I guess the question I have is, a lot of your games stem from or feature relatively small possibility spaces in an industry that frequently pushes for larger possibility spaces. Do you think, I know that has over time especially become very consciously associated with you and your games and people who make games that are inspired by yours. Originally, did that sort of stem from the process of how you were jamming these games out? Or did the process of how you were jamming these games out stem from your desire to explore a small possibility space?
Yeah, at first I would say that the possibility spaces aren't that small just because of how combinatorics works. Even if something's on a small spatial area, when you're looking at how many different combinations of different placements of objects on a grid there are, the numbers, like the literal multiplication, gets enormous very quickly.
There's only a small number of choices at a time, but
yes, I think that's more what I meant to say.
No, but it's an interesting point to think about, because a lot of the superficially larger games that you're referring to, they are sparser. They have a larger geometric space which the objects inhabit, but less objects and less different arrangements of them and less relationships between them. So to go back to your question, what I certainly did start making these smaller games from what was practical for me to make in a jam. I had been, when I was making roguelikes, I started trying to make roguelikes like the big classics, ADOM and NetHack. They're on like an 80 by 20 grid, and that's 100 levels deep and so on. And gradually getting smaller and smaller led to something that I could practically make. And then, but when I had that, I realized this is actually great. This can have really as much depth of interaction by having a denser set of objects on the smaller space that have a denser set of relationships and interconnections between them.
And do you think there's anything else you did or do that helps shape a project into something of completable size? I
have to say that's like a lot of intuitive sense that's built up by practice, by doing it a lot of times. Doing the game jams, like you just go through that process over and over again, making a 2-hour game, making a 20-minute game. So some of those Cambridge jams, we had challenges coming throughout the jam saying, make a game about this in half an hour, and not everyone leapt to it, but if you, these kind of improv challenges builds your intuitive sense of what you can do, what the shape of a finishable project feels like. And it's not something I might be able to articulate some principles with a great deal of thought, but it's just a feel developed by practice.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely, I have a similar sense of like, oh, I can't really articulate this, but I feel like this is a promising direction and this is a scary direction. I know you've talked a little bit about how the last few years have been pretty rough in terms of how much you've been able to make games, and you've been, like 868 back feels like a good return to form. I'm curious, was there any of that intuition that you'd built up from previous projects that you felt like having that kind of gap, were you able to bring back those intuitions like fairly quickly, or do you feel like you needed a while to work back up to your previous level of like intuition and direction?
I've definitely needed to build back up my capacity to work. Like certainly at some points during my illness, my brain was just not working right. I quite clearly remember playing Bubba Is You at one point and really struggling with some of the levels. And then 6-9 months later, I played it again, and at a point where my general fatigue and brain fog had lifted, and absolutely breezing through some of the puzzles I'd struggled with, and heaps more after that, because I could just, the intuitive machinery was back online. So I would say that there was some having to build the intuition back up again, but it was more building the entire ability to work back up again. I think my intuition has been online before my stamina, for example, my ability to work for more than an hour at a time. Certainly, like my current project 868 back, I started I guess about 2 years ago, and looking at how I was working then to working now, like I was already recovered quite a bit then, but across those last 2 years, I've built up more, and I'm able to go and go and go now, which is amazing. And I can still overdo it, and if I do, I still hit a patch of fatigue, and the symptoms start coming back. So I'm still in that sense disabled, but as long as I stay within the ever-changing space that I'm capable of inhabiting, which is a challenge, then I'm able to be very productive again.
And how do you balance? And this is something that, like, I don't talk about that often, but like sometimes I deal with as well. How do you balance, I guess, being kind to yourself when your desire for creative expression outpaces your ability to execute, just from like a how many hours in the day you're able to actually sit down and do the work type of manner?
Yeah, it has been sometimes frustrating, because creative work, when you're doing it, when you're feeling inspired, it gives you energy. And like sometimes when I was really exhausted, I wanted the energy that I get from feeling productive, and I couldn't access it. Honestly, there's no simple answer. I've had to be very patient and listen to my biological and physiological and psychological needs, and take it slowly, accept that I can't always do what I used to be able to do, and what I sometimes think I should be able to do, but also like taking time off to rest, to take a walk outside, to go to the beach, like these are regenerative, energizing activities as well. That I guess the basic one of the basic principles I've realized for dealing with the chronic fatigue is that there's always something that I can do, actually, and I have to really listen inside my body, like what is that thing? And sometimes I'm sitting down trying to work, and I just hit, like, I can't concentrate, I can't do anything. If I really ask myself, what do I want to do? I want to go and wash the dishes because they're piled up, and like I seemed incapacitated. It seemed like I couldn't do anything, but then this simple physical activity I can do, or maybe even go for a run. Like sometimes I can't walk, but somehow, like illogically, I can run, and then I feel better, and then I can. It doesn't always make sense, and you just have to be really open-minded about what the need of this organism is right now. And so sometimes it's unexpected, but there is actually always an answer. Sometimes it's rest, of course. Sometimes it's just stop and lie down. But it's often a physical activity, just a different one than what I was trying to do.
Yeah, thanks. That's a fantastic answer.
I'm curious, have you gone through phases, either on this project or others, where your ideation has gotten significantly ahead of what you're able to actually get into the game? I can kind of feel like for games like 868 back and many others you've made, you could like come up with like endless lists of like, oh, what if this, what if that, and like actually, but the act of making the game is like taking those lists and going like, okay, well, what are the actual important ones to try, and out of the ones I try, which ones work? And I feel like with that kind of, when you're balancing, okay, how much bandwidth do I have for actually sitting down and making the game, it might be quite easy to get ahead of yourself and like have too much of a backlog to like ever get through.
Yes and no. Like honestly, my my current document, like I keep a text file of what are the tasks to do, and that's currently 1,000 lines long. Like that, there is a lot of stuff, but like a lot of that is kind of minor. Actually, it's like this UI element needs to change, or there's a bug if you combine these free devices, and like it's in terms of like the big scale ideas of like what's a whole new mechanic that could be introduced. I haven't so much had that experience of getting ahead because I haven't been thinking ahead. Like I think ahead in terms of the broad scope, but in terms of like, okay, I've got to a point where I need to put in a new ability for an enemy to have or something, then when I reach that point, the idea comes. I'm not spending time on ideation ahead of time. I'm just trusting that at the moment when I do need the idea, then it will just come because I have the ability to generate as many ideas as I need whenever I need to. I'm just not wasting time cycling that ahead of the work that I'm actually doing.
That's interesting. So you're saying that it's less that you are like having like ideas like, oh, what if this was a program, or what if this was a dev that you can install, and more like you'll get to a point in development where you're like, okay, well, I think that there's not enough progs. What's something that could fill this space? Okay, I'll just come up with something whole cloth that fits the specific thing I'm trying to deal with now.
Yeah, absolutely. Or if I find one that needs to go, it doesn't work for some reason, I'll take it out and there's a hole for like a day. And then the idea that I need comes as soon as I start trying to have ideas, and I put that in. Like that happened recently. We took something out and I put a new one in. I thought, this is a bit weird. I don't know if you'll like it. And it was there for a couple of weeks and my playtesters didn't mention it. And then one of them said, I think the reason none of us have been talking about it is because it just works. I was like, oh, okay, great.
I mean, I'm sure now you have a pretty good sense of like, oh, how many of this thing do I need? I mean, you've got kind of a database of things, so that kind of like informs that kind of how much content do you need. But like, do you think that sense of like, oh, I need more of this, or oh, like the like how did you feel like when enough is enough and you don't need more of a certain type of content?
It's a lot about if there's a need for a certain type of interaction, like you're playing the game and you want to create a combo. So I'm looking for a thing that combines with these 2 or 3 other elements in an interesting way. And so yeah, it's not. So sometimes I look at the numbers and I think, oh, it would be cool if this was a nice round number. And so, for example, the number of devices in the game right now is actually 68, just to be cute. But that's because it was near that number. And I was like, oh, if I just added a couple more, then it would be the number that's in the name of the game, and that would be cute. So it's not. But mostly, I'm thinking there. You have 2 or 3 devices that say increase damage, and wouldn't it be cool if there was a thing that was useful by itself but was extra useful if you combined it with something that increased damage, just for example. So it's about finding the spaces in the rule set where an interesting combination could arise, and then trying to find the particular mechanic or rule that would go with that.
So as we record this, it's the game is going to be out in 3-ish weeks, and that's especially funny because when this episode comes out, the game will already be out.
No, this is going out.
Oh, this is going out
before.
just before. Oh, incredible! Oh, even better. How are you feeling 3 weeks before launch?
I'm really excited to get it out and really, really busy. But like in a good way. I feel like there's a there's a substantial chunk of work that would still be good to do. The version we have is pretty good, and like if I suddenly got sick and we had to release that version, it wouldn't be a disaster. But I have a huge list of bugs that mostly you'd have to be playing for quite a few hours and be doing some particular tricky thing to be able to encounter that bug. There's so many edge cases in this game, but a few bugs still that you can run into early on. And I'm working with Finji has been interesting because they're really good at what they do, and they've really encouraged me to. I don't know, this is obvious, but prioritize the things that will affect more people and that are nearer to the start of the game. Because the way I kind of usually do things is treat everything as equal. I just have a big text file of all the things to do, and when the text file is empty, the game's done, so I release it. And like that has worked for me on my own for smaller projects, but it's not so practical for a bigger game. And working with a publisher, they want to be able to schedule releases and like plan around that ahead of time. So it's been great. Like Adam Saltzman is super helpful to talk to on this, and just learning these organizational skills that I hadn't needed in my previous projects of prioritizing, triaging, and all this. So there's a ton of work to still do. We've got someone working on some graphics and working on some sound effects that are still coming in. That are going to it's this wonderful stage of these last few things bringing the game to a new kind of life with these outside contributions, which I haven't done so much of in the past. And so it's exciting and a lot of work.
Yeah, does this feel like a different size of game to the projects you've worked on previously?
Yeah, it's definitely the biggest. Verdict's Dispenser, my first commercial game, was quite big, actually. I did this typical thing of being over-ambitious for an early project. And I did actually manage to kind of finish it and release it, but it had some problems. But I also burnt myself out a lot trying to do something that was a bit beyond my capacities at the time, which young people should find out, explore what their capacities are, not necessarily go beyond them like that, but stretch them. So I don't think I was necessarily so wrong to do that, but I kind of shied away from that kind of scale after that. And like I said, did lots of game jams, which was great for me. And I guess I've been gradually scoping up since then. And then this, I expected, like coming back after my illness, I expected I was just going to make some small things, and then that just grew and grew. Yeah, it's something.
Yeah, because I feel like there's even people who like follow your work and like are excited for this game, I feel like there's maybe something about it. It's like, oh yeah, Michael's doing another game. It's going to be good. And like also the fact that it's a sequel to 868 Hack, it like implies like a certain level of like scope. I'm like, okay, yeah, it's gonna be a good thing. It doesn't inherently imply, oh yeah, this is going to be an order of magnitude more involved, like more replayable, more great defining. Like it's exciting. I hope people are going to really enjoy digging into it.
Yeah, I like when I did the crowdfunding for a year or so ago, and like sporadically since then, I've realized that I haven't really managed to communicate what it is. And again, it's nice working with Finji. They have a cool marketing team that are trying to figure out this problem of how to explain to people what it is. So I don't have to do it all myself. But yeah, people really have an idea what to expect from me, which feels strange since I feel like I've done so many different things. And they should expect that I would keep doing different things. But I don't know.
I mean, it feels like this type of game could uniquely benefit from that kind of explainer. But there's also, I mean, and this is not even just strictly true of bro likes, like this is just generally across the thinky space. There's a real difficulty of getting someone to understand why one game, like someone from the general audience to understand why one game is different than another. One thing I think about a lot is like games that are Sokoban inspired are like famously hard for people in the general audience to understand why one is different than another, why one might be better than another. But in this case, do you have a relatively refined pitch at this point, or are you still working on that with Finji?
I'm I probably should have a refined pitch, shouldn't I?
Well, maybe that's just Finji's problem.
Maybe it is. Like, I think what I would, for like, especially for the wider audience, I'm trying to draw their attention to the setting, the vibe, the genre. Like, it's a cool hacker in a cyber world. You know, that's maybe something to talk about. That this game, compared to my previous games, it doesn't have a full like pages of text story, but I've done more work on world building and creating a setting and creating. I was going to say creating a world, but I just said that with world building. But you know, it's making it feel like a place and that it's inhabited by plausible characters. That it's been something that people criticize my games about, that they're too abstract for a lot of people, and I don't think I've necessarily solved it in a way that will satisfy these people, but I have done differently, and that's interesting. There's not narrative told in the way that the wider audience might expect, but it's there. It's, to me, it told in the way that was interesting to get it in there. It's famously a hard problem to tell a story in a game because it conflicts with the interactivity of a game, and people have strong opinions about this. And I think I've done a good way of walking that line. But I know for a lot of people it'll be too far to one side or the other. But for me, I feel like I've done it well.
I mean, I'm happy to hear that. I'm excited that you're able to execute that creative vision. Do you have any questions for us?
So yeah, for Alan, because I lived in the UK for some years and was involved in the UK scene, and then I've been away. Like, what is the scene like there now? Are there the same kinds of events? Are the same people still around? Are there jams? Like, what's the feeling of it?
I mean, I'm not in touch with whatever scene there is as much as I was, but I think partly that's because the scene that we knew doesn't really exist anymore, which is quite sad. It feels like that kind of like community of creators like getting to know each other and like influencing each other's works. I think that still exists, but it's way more online now, and that affects how it works as well. But the Cambridge jam scene like kind of dispersed and stopped happening. The people who I met in those communities are kind of not really centralized anywhere. I do hang out with game developers, but it's much more for like playing board games than for sitting down and like comparing design notes and like going like, oh, I'm stuck on this problem. And like I actually feel like the UK is worse in that regard than lots of other places I've been through. Like Montreal, Melbourne, Los Angeles seem to have a much stronger community and like culture than London does or anywhere in the UK really does these days.
That's really interesting to hear, because like personally I'm trying to figure out where to be, and that time when I was living in the UK was one of my most productive periods, and part of that was the scene. So I'm like, oh, I could move back to the UK, but I obviously I know it wouldn't be like it was, but yeah, that's a good data point to know.
And I think part of that is like, oh, we just all got old, and like, why should I know where the cool 20-year-olds making games are hanging out or what they're like? That's not my scene. They'll have their own spaces and they'll be making interesting stuff.
Statistically, it's happening on Roblox.
Right? Sure.
Yeah, but we always had a few of the slightly older generation who would hang around and
I think Discord is partly responsible for it. And that's saying something as like somebody who's got a lot of valuable community from Discord, but it's not quite the same.
Yeah, that's I want an intergenerational scene where we have sometimes the up and coming artists and the people who've been doing this for their whole lives in one place.
I also think part of this, depressingly, is just the way we were doing things kind of got swallowed up by the indie game scene like exploding in size. And I think the motivations that we had like 10, 15 years ago are harder to maintain today, when it's not really the case that you can make something interesting and get a large number of people to like see it. And it wasn't guaranteed back then, but it was definitely easier to like make something cool and not think about like, okay, I got to market this, and have like that thing spread either through word of mouth or through journalism or through getting a game on Steam before there were so many games on Steam. And so I think people aren't rewarded for making interesting things in the same way that they were a decade ago.
Yeah, it's interesting because like obviously I have children now. I have the motivation to make money for like extra reasons. And I find that if I just like set out to make something that makes money, it doesn't work. Like the creativity doesn't flow. And what we had in that scene, it was about letting your creative freedom express. It wasn't about, if I make something I can get 10,000 views on social media. It wasn't about that. But I don't know, maybe the fact that was there did help support it somehow. So
I don't think it was about money, and I don't think it was about views, but I think it was to some degree about recognition.
Yeah, cred.
Yeah. And like everything's kind of about cred when you get down to it. But I feel like it would be very easy today to make the kind of things that we were making back then and not feel like you were able to find the people who would appreciate it.
Yeah, it certainly felt odd that I could just be this guy from nowhere and just make something, and then there's suddenly some New York professor is teaching about it in their class. Like, what? That was always surprising and amazing to me that things like that happened. But yeah, it was also super cool that could happen. And you're right. I don't know if that is much less accessible for that kind of thing to spontaneously happen today, and maybe not at all for a lot of people. I liked the Cambridge indie scene.
Yeah,
me too.
Sometimes.
Is there anything that we haven't gotten to talk about that you wanted to chat about?
I think we should talk about Corrypt a little.
Yeah.
Go for it.
Which is your most puzzly work, I think, or the most well-known puzzle game you've done. How do you describe it?
I actually very rarely need to describe it because most people I talk to have heard of it. It's a moderately interesting Sokoban variant that then has another layer, which it sort of started as a programming puzzle game, but turned into something else. And I ended up finding it a mechanic that felt like it really expressed something artistically, like almost on a political level. It's like about a kind of pollution, a destruction of the world, the consequences of power, and like big themes managed to squeeze into a little package. And so that's cool. And it was fun to make and like intense to make. Actually, it was because it has this sense that it's made up of a world of little grid puzzles, but all of the grids interact in a way. So I had to kind of work with the superposition of all these grids and what position objects are in one place in the world affects what the level design had to be in other places in this ludicrous way, which was this real puzzle to figure out to make it. It was more of a puzzle to make it than it is to solve it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's the kind of thing where you need to have everything in your head at the same time in order to make any change. And so it's the kind of thing that you can kind of only make if you are like really focused and like powering through and like getting it together in like a semi-short period of time, because the moment you put it down, like the cost to pick it up again, to relearn where you were and how everything fits together and why this thing over here was it this thing over here. It's very, very precarious. I mean, it's a kind of design that's incredibly rewarding. I've done it a few times, but yeah, like very involved and very puzzly to make.
Yeah, absolutely. There are a few things in it that I feel like, oh, maybe that it could be improved, but I can't go and break that open and improve it. I'm not in it like I was, so it just has to be how I managed to get it then.
Is there anything specific that you feel like, oh, I wish this thing could be improved?
I'm not sure. There's some points where the game forces magic upon you. Like you go into a room and magic has already happened.
Right at the start. Or does it also happen later on too?
Yeah, I feel like maybe that was unnecessary and it could have been set up to all be from the player's actions. And I'm not sure why I did that.
That's a big design goal. Like, because I feel like the way it currently works, like it tutorializes things in a very, very neat way. But yeah, I can see where you're coming from. Of like, on a thematic level, it would be satisfying to always have this corruption be triggered by the player.
Yeah, the other thing is that mostly you want to create open spaces because it's
right.
A top-down 2D movement, open spaces where you can move to. There's no reason why you would want to lock in a wall. And I'd love there to be reasons why you would. It would just be deeper and richer. And the only thing I can really think of is if it was a bloody platformer, because then locking in a wall would be locking in a platform that you could jump on, and just locking in open spaces wouldn't give you vertical access. And so that's a huge... and maybe someone should make that as a separate thing of its own.
Am I right that you toyed with something like that in your game for Experiment 12, which is a deep cut?
Yeah, that's honestly one of the games I'm most proud of that I've made. So it's a good card. It has multiple worlds overlaid with the same inputs. So there is a kind of some DNA it shares there, and some of those worlds are platformers, but it doesn't have the concept of like locking.
Right.
Something.
Is there anything you learned about the process of making Corrypt that you feel like was like an interesting takeaway about making puzzle games specifically?
So to make it, I made a level editor that was in game that I could flip. Just have a button on the screen that I could flip between playing the game and editing the levels really quickly, and I had that on my iPad, so I would be like playing it on the bus and be able to switch between playing the game and making a game really quickly. I don't know if I would say I've learned that because I haven't done that since, but yeah, it's a lesson I should learn from that, just how valuable it can be to make your own tools and to have those tools easily accessible in the context of playing and testing the game, so that you can just have a very low friction to solving problems that you find. I had also like an editor for the graphics and for the music embedded in the game, which nobody else doesn't make a difference to anyone else because it was just for me. But that helped make the process of making it feel expressive. That I had it all in one package. Around thinky game communities, when my work comes up, I sometimes see that obviously people are especially enthusiastic about puzzle games, and like people would like to see more puzzles from me, and I've mostly since then made more strategy games. And the thing is, I don't really play a lot of puzzle games. I play Alan's sometimes, which I really do like. But as someone who studied as a mathematician and who does making games and programming, personally, I find that solving puzzles feels a bit fake. Like it's not like to me a real problem is something that's open-ended that has maybe never been solved before, like an open research problem, or like the kinds of problems that arise in programming where you have a wide range of possible approaches you could solve them by, and you're thinking about efficiency and practicalities and externalities, and not just this little pure but fake thing. And I know that for a lot of people, that is the very appeal of puzzle games, that you have this self-contained thing that doesn't have externalities. And I respect that people like that, but it's just taste. To me, it's like, whatever, it's fake. So I'm not usually set out to make a pure puzzle game. It just sometimes when you're exploring systems, that's what turns out to be the nicest way to express it. I don't want to knock puzzles, because I know a lot of people here are really into them, but it's just not that interesting to me to spend so much time on. I'll make them sometimes.
A thinky genre that I think you haven't made anything in. I'm curious if you play them or would be interested in designing them. It's like engineering games, like Zachtronics.
Oh, I love Zach-likes. Actually, Corrypt started as a Zach-like. I'd been playing Space Chem, and I was like, oh, I could put a little grid where there's some little guys that fly around and maybe rotate left or right, and then like if they go over a certain tile, they'll flip a bit, so they'll flip between turning left and turning right states. And so there's like some elements from that kind of engineering setup that are still in Corrypt. Yeah, I think Zach does a great job of those, and so like there's a steady stream of those coming out that are just more or less perfectly what I would want from them. So I'm not feeling that there's a hole in the world that I can fill there. You know, if he wasn't doing it, then maybe I would feel I had to. but I'm just I really like them, and maybe I will make one sometime, or maybe I will try to make one again and end up with something else, like as happened with Corrypt.
Awesome. And what lessons do you think that you've learned from the development of 868 back that you suspect will carry forward into future games?
I could fill a book with this, honestly, because coming back to working productively after my illness, I've had to quite consciously develop my working practice. Before, I started experimenting making games when I was a child, and it was just a thing that I did. It's not a thing that I externally examined. I'd just sit down, start making a game. And I'd examine elements of process, like how do I do a networking client, or how do I do a pixel shader? But I didn't examine the entire thing as a whole. But now I've had to rebuild that, and it doesn't sum up easily. But I know how to create an artist, like the balance of spending time by yourself, spending time socially, spending time in nature, to just feel balanced as a person and get into the space where creativity comes on call. And how much time to spend sitting at the computer, when to take a break, when to go for a walk. I don't have a formula for it, but I have. Ask me again in a few years, and I might have this more verbally articulated. That's how long ideas take to digest. But I have a practical understanding of how to do work that I previously just had the intuitive understanding, and I think in future I will have more of the verbally articulated understanding, if that makes sense. There's these stages that an idea goes through before you can really communicate it effectively to someone else. But also, it's been the first time I've been collaborating with others on a really significant scale. It's like some of my other games, I got someone to do a little bit of sound and music, or like one jam game I made with Andy McClure across a weekend. Like I hadn't done a serious collaboration, but on 868 back, Tara has been working on the music that's my wife. She's been working on the music for several months, and so there's been the back and forth there, and learning how to support her to be able to do it. How much information I need to give her the context of what the music needs to do in the game. And then now in this last couple of months, we've got someone who's doing some graphics for scenes in the game, and someone who's doing sound effects. And that practice I've done of learning how to work with Tara is coming in. And I've learned things from that to be able to work with these new people who are coming on in the last phase. And of course, learning more things as I see which communications work for getting them to understand what's needed, and which things then we need to go back and forth more on. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. No, it answers it really thoughtfully. Thank you. Awesome. With that, I think that's everything, unless, Alan, you have one last thing to ask.
No, I don't think so.
Awesome. Well, thank you again so much, Michael, for taking the time to come and speak to us.
Oh, you're very welcome.
Normally I ask where people can find you online, but for this, maybe the better question is, where can people find 868 back?
On Steam, and I think GOG, and maybe Itch, and maybe Humble. Like, check Finji. They're doing all the what platforms are. I shouldn't accidentally announce something that's not true.
Okay. Check with Finji.
It will be out quite soon on PC, and it will be coming out on mobile at some later point.
Awesome.
And it's actually because it's a surprisingly big game, it's going to be a lot of work to actually make it work in the mobile interface. But I promised people in the crowdfunding that it would be, so I have to figure it out.
So it goes.
I hadn't quite realized at that point how much of a bigger game it was, even though I knew it was a bit bigger.
This is always a thing. People for centuries to come will be learning the lesson of do not promise specific platforms in your crowdfunding campaign.
I'm still waiting for the PlayStation Vita version of Mighty Number 9. No, I'm not actually, but that's they promised that and then they said, whoops. All right. Thank you. Thank you very much again for joining us. And thank you for listening to the Drachnick and Friends official podcast. Our music is by Priscilla Snow, who you can find at ghoulnoisemusic.com. Our podcast artwork is by Adam DeGrandis. Our podcast is edited by Melanie Zawodniak. Please rate and review us on your podcast service of choice, and be sure to tune in next episode for more interesting conversations.